And whoop. Okay, we're recording. So, welcome to the After Party Conversations with Spy Party players. Today I'm talking with Warningtrack. Say hello, Warningtrack.
Hello, Warningtrack.
Awesome.
I low-hanging fruit. I had to explain
Yeah,
that.
yeah, we had to go there. So anyway, Warningtrack politely offered to come join the show because I believe you have some experience with online communities before and had some like stuff that you thought might be interesting to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's really interesting here is that forums are largely considered a dead medium. So one of the reasons I brought this up is because you don't find them in that many other places anymore. When I first started working on forums, and I've had every role. I've been what's called a mentor or an advisor, a moderator, an admin, an outright owner who didn't run it as much day to day, like every single role you can imagine, down to from admin to just lowly new member.
Hmm.
Um, and when I started doing all that, like literally 15 years ago, like half my life, I've been doing this.
Wow.
Forums were everywhere. That was how you communicated. They started off with sort of like, user groups, news groups, like on CompuServe. I don't know if too many of the people listening to this are as old as I am. I turned 30 this year, so I don't know if they're gonna have any idea what those are. But they're like really low-tech forums, and sometimes it would literally just be email based, if you can imagine that, which you probably can't, and it was terrible. But forums were how people talked online, before Facebook or even instant message or anything like that. And you still see them around, but they're kind of rare now because you can get what you need from all these other sources, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. And the
Yeah.
place you primarily see them now are places like this, like for games, like little communities that they can't afford to let their content be transient. Like a Facebook feed is very hard to scroll through. It's really not designed to be looked at later on. It's designed to be looked at shortly after things have gone up. But forums are. Forums are more like archives, and games need that. So it's actually really one of the few places where you still see old-fashioned forums.
That that's interesting. So, like, do you feel like it's something that's uh, just in niche communities like video game communities where sort of small intense groups form, or like have you found there's other like marginal groups where forums spring up?
Well, I kind of wonder. I don't know if it has anything to do with being a niche group or not, because you see a lot of niche groups using the other forums. You see a lot of Facebook groups that
Yeah,
are niche, or a lot of, particularly, you see blogs with very active comment sections.
or tumblers.
Sometimes
Yeah.
or tumblers, right? And the comment sections are kind of robust. They're more than just comments. They're not a full-fledged forum. They don't have a lot of features, but there's enough there that you can carry on conversations. And I feel like that's where the niche stuff goes. I think it's more like with games in particular, you have a lot of questions. You have a lot of questions that get asked repeatedly. So you need to have like an archive sort of thing. It needs to be easy to search and see what people have already said.
Hmm.
And
Although having
introduce
said that,
yourself.
that is not necessarily something our forum is the best for. But ideally,
That's That's true. That's true. There are a few elective things Checker could do to make it a little easier, to be sure. But it is better than, well, it depends what you're comparing it to, though, right? Like, it could be a lot better, and I can imagine how it could be a lot better. But if it were literally just a series of posts with comment replies on a Facebook page, it would be 20 times harder. And maybe even the same for blogs if all the answers were posted in comments. At least this is searchable and sortable and
hmm,
designed to be scrolled through quickly. So it's easy to take that for granted, but you don't see it as often. So I think it could definitely be better, but it could also be a heck of a lot worse.
yeah. And like to be fair, I have not had any experience with forum communities before, so I don't myself have anything to compare it to. I think it's fine. Like it's uh, the forum feels like it doesn't have anything extraneous, which is good.
Yes, yeah, that's actually like an ongoing sort of argument among forum owners. Not they don't argue it explicitly, but they tend to go in one of those two directions, right? It's either about the discussion or it's sort of about the bells and the whistles. I mean, there's a million and one things you can put on any major piece of forum software. The Spy Party forum runs something called PHP which stands for Bulletin Board. It's freeware. It's totally free. I think it's open source. The community develops it, and it's fine. It's a good free forum. But there's obviously like another tier of forums you can get if you're willing to pay something for it. vBulletin was big for a lot of years. Zen4o was made by people who branched off from vBulletin. vBulletin's what I use on mine still. Um, And the argument is sort of, yeah, do you have a lot of like custom avatars? Do you have images in signatures? Do you have lots of little, reputation systems and private comments and private messages? Or do you just sort of keep it, stripped down bare? Do you keep it to the essentials? And Checker certainly leaned more that way so far. I hope I can talk him into custom avatars at some point. I think that would help a lot because it's really hard to tell who's saying what right now, And actually, I have a little quick funny story about that. You actually use avatars. You've probably been on some forums like that where people have avatars, right? And they
No,
use them
no,
to
no.
identify
So
themselves.
this is the first forum community I've ever been in,
Ever.
ever.
That's remarkable. Well, case in point, though, right? I mean, I guess maybe you're a little younger than I am. You've
22.
yeah, see, exactly. Like, I mean, that's you're probably still an extreme example. I think most people have joined a few forums even at that
Yeah,
age.
yeah. I'm on the other side of the
Right.
bell curve. Yeah.
Right, but I mean, you're a perfect example of what I'm talking about. Where you're like, this just isn't how I communicate. Like, I use maybe everything else. I don't know what you use, but probably a number of those other things I mentioned, and not forums. But even in non-forums comment sections, maybe if they have like a persistent registration, you'll see avatars, right? Like a little image associated with someone's name,
Hmm.
and you come to associate that with them. And in some places you're not allowed to have them, and in some places like Spy Party you're allowed to use one of a predefined 5 or 10 or whatever, which is what we have going on now. And in other places, a lot of places, you're allowed to upload your own, and it'll resize it, and there's content guidelines. But what's funny is a few years ago, as an April Fool's joke, one of the members who had an avatar that he like never changed, right? It was perfect for him, so he never changed it.
This is in
Some
the
other
Spy
member,
Party forum.
no, this is in the forum I run.
Okay,
It's a
okay.
movie website. Spy Party forum, you cannot upload your own
No, I was
avatar.
gonna say.
You yeah, right. So he had one that was perfect for him, and April Fools came around, and one guy just kind of spontaneously decided to save his avatar and then upload it as his own too. So they both had the same avatar, and it's like, aha, that's really funny. Oh no, but in the next like 30 minutes after this happened, I'd say like all the regulars who were online did the exact same thing.
Oh no.
But they didn't do it with his avatar. They did it with someone else's. They just picked random avatars from all over the site, and the end result was, well, frankly, chaos. It was absolute chaos. People were constantly like, "How could you say that? You never say this sort of thing." And then they'd look at the username and go, "Oh my goodness, I absolutely thought you were this other person." And we didn't realize until that moment just how little people were actually reading the usernames on the posts. They really just glanced out of their periphery and saw the avatar, and that's who it was. In future years, there were variations on this theme. The next year, instead of everyone switching avatars, which happened again with no organization or direction from anyone, it just sort of happened spontaneously. The next year, spontaneously, everyone used my avatar, which is a which is a picture of Yoda. So there were literally 30 Yodas on the homepage, just all talking to each other. And I'm not kidding. 3 times that day, I thought, I never said that. What? Oh, again. Like, it was really shocking to see how much people did that little mental shortcut. But anyway, that aside, that actually is a big part of internet culture in the same way your username is, right? People put a lot of thought into their usernames. It sort of defines who they are, and we come to know them by that. People in Spy Party, they don't call me Chris, they call me Track. It's a big deal. And if you have an avatar, it's just like that too. So hopefully, if Checker happens to hear this, I hope I can talk him into custom avatars at some point. Because right now, I feel like there are 50 people using the same avatar of some of the new art characters, and it's surprisingly. This is going to sound so lazy. It's a lot of mental work to read the username every time.
Well, hey, like, I don't know, maybe it's somewhat appropriate for the Spy Party community, or
Yes, I see where you're going.
for Spy Party's game. It's like, wow, you got to pay attention to those small visual cues.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Although it would also be appropriate for Spy Party that we all took each other's avatars and pretended to be someone else.
Yeah, we should. Well, hey, maybe we should ring that in as an April Fools for people who are
Yeah.
like brave enough to share account details with each other to be like, can you guess which person I actually am?
Can you guess which person I am? Yeah. Or maybe we can all go to orange dress avatars. Why not?
Why not, indeed? Yeah. So what? To like bring this back to actually being an interview, which is what it's kind of supposed to be. It's like what originally way back when got you into forum communities? Like what was the appeal for you?
Well, at first, and I think this is actually probably, I'm really glad you asked that because I think it actually contains a significant insight into what forums are really for. It was utilitarian. I needed something. I was learning how to make websites. I was like God, 14 years old trying to teach myself HTML and other things like that. And there was a web development site and they had a forum. And there is really no better topic for a forum than web development because everyone has questions. How do I do this? Why doesn't this work? Where do I learn this? Where do I find a script that does that? Is absolutely tailor made for it. And so I signed up and I started learning things. And from that point, I realized that they were using software that you could just buy. And I thought, boy, wouldn't it be really neat to play around with this kind of software and to run one of these? And I thought, oh, what's interesting? And I go, movies. I like movies. Sure, why not? So I started a movie message board, and that was 14 and a half years ago, which is an insanely long time on the internet. I can't believe it's still going. It's bizarre, but
Do you feel okay disclosing the name of the forum?
oh, sure. It's literally just movieforums.com. One of the advantages of doing this 14 years ago is that all those cool domain names were still available.
Hmm.
So, things that you couldn't actually get. I remember at the time I was trying to decide between whether or not it should be called movieforums.com or movieboards.com, and I'm sitting there thinking, which one of these domain names should I buy? And now present day me is screaming it past me, buy them both, buy them, buy 50 of them, borrow money and buy as many domain names as possible. They're not going to make any more. It's like, the baseball cards and the bike spokes of my generation,
Yeah.
of all these missed opportunities. But from
No, it's
there,
good to get in early while all the
yeah,
names are free.
so I just ran that for a while, and the more I did, the more I just thought, wow, this is interesting. The social dynamics of forums, how they differ from real life, and the kind of decisions you have to make. And I made plenty of bad decisions in the first couple of years, but my heart was in the right place, so people stuck around, thankfully, and they stuck with me. And after I think, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years, I just thought, you know what? I think I'm figuring out how this works. I think there are like rules to this, and they're not the same rules that would work in other formats. They're not the same rules that would work in instant message or chat rooms or real life or anything like that. There's this own little culture here, and a lot of it is consistent across communities. And then I just started getting really interested in it. And right around that time, I knew another developer who wrote a book, Patrick O'Keefe, great guy, wrote a book about managing communities and started a blog about it. And it just sort of, I noticed it had become a little cottage industry talking about this. So other people had realized the same thing I had. They'd realized that this is like a unique thing.
So,
So
oh
I
yeah,
just find it fascinating. I find it
oh.
fascinating the ways it differs from real life and other mediums.
So what are some of the sort of common threads you were talking about a moment ago that you found through experience with forum communities? Like what are these sort of common customs?
Well, there's like really big picture stuff, like sociological stuff, and then there's like much more finely tuned things. Like for example, the finely tuned things are that you will literally have a shocking number of users falling into one of a couple dozen personality types. I mean,
Huh.
that actually sounds kind of grim, right? It feels like you're just stripping away people's humanity. But, there's still gradations within it. There's a really famous series of internet cartoons called Flame Warriors. It's just a series of hand-drawn images depicting, literally, the stereotypes of different forum users, and I highly recommend everyone Googles it and reads through them, because if you've spent any time on a forum, you'll find at least a few, and you'll think, oh, I know 5 people that this
I
describes
know this
perfectly.
person.
You're right. Like there's one called, I remember there was one called The Archivist, and by way of example, the cartoon was a guy sitting at a computer, and there's like a filing cabinet coming out of his head. And he was the archivist, and the type of person that described was someone who, and this is actually very relevant to Spy Party, someone who every time someone posts something immediately says, well, this was talked about here at this date, and we already reached this conclusion, and please remember to post there, and things like that. And there is, if you have a community of any decent size, that guy is always there. Just always. There's always someone like that. And they'll differ here and there, but there's always someone like that. And there'll be others there'll be like a motherly figure who's like very kind to everyone and wishes everyone happy birthday and doesn't like it when people fight and tries to encourage them to get along. And all these archetypes, it's amazing how many people fit into one of those. Now, granted, there's several dozen, so it's not too broad a brush.
Hmm.
But I just thought it was interesting that every time I would read through that, I would think, yeah, no, I know tons of people that do. And it just sort of holds. So I think it must be something about the medium.
That's
The
quite
medium of,
fascinating.
yeah, right, because
Yeah, that people
yeah.
sink into roles naturally.
Right. Well, I guess it's because if you're coming to the same site day after day, the forums have personalities in the way social media doesn't. Social media is huge. It's too big to have any one personality. And so often our news feeds are just reflections of ourselves or the people we know, right? So they're just so tailored and individual. But with a forum, you really do get a cross section of people that you wouldn't otherwise. And they have, because you can see all the threads that have been there before, it has a history that social media doesn't. So I don't know. I'm trying to wrap my head around why this is exactly, because it's a
Mm.
kind of a big question to ask, right? But
Well, yeah.
but it means that there's a personality day in and day out to the forum, and the more you expose yourself to that, I think the more you kind of have to decide: am I the kind of person who cares about spelling? And I'm going to correct a lot of people. Am I the kind of person who cares about duplicate topics? Am I the kind of person who likes to argue, who hates when people argue? And whatever germ of that you have in you, it just gets reinforced every day by coming to the same forum. And at some point, you're going to just gravitate towards one of those roles more than the other, maybe.
No, that's very interesting. It's also very interesting the point you bring up uh, about sort of dominant social networking sites. And like I'm not even sure if it's a problem with them, but contemporary media, there's just so much content and information that it feels very difficult on any of those sites to really grasp onto and reflect on anything that you're reading because there's just so much of it.
Yeah, and not only that, but look at the way things are designed. This is the web developer in me coming out a little bit
Right.
now. Look at the way Facebook is designed, right? I mean, not only is there a news feed that just rolls through these things all day, but look at the comments. Small text, small box. It starts off as a one-line box. It's not designed. I don't know if you ever ever tried to have an argument on Facebook.
I did a
I
couple times and I immediately felt like this doesn't feel like it was designed for discussion.
Right, exactly. And now that's above and beyond the pointlessness of arguing on Facebook just inherently.
Yeah.
But from a design standpoint, it's awkward, right? Like even multiple paragraphs. Enter submits a comment. Shift enter is a new paragraph. So that tells me that they're not expecting a lot of comments with multiple paragraphs, among other things. So it's just not designed for that. Forums absolutely are. They encourage forum. Let me put it this way: if social media is tweets, little bite size, then forums are a long essay. You know, they're designed to be absorbed that way. They're designed to encourage, more talking, which is why they're perfect for Spy Party, by the way, more
Mm.
than other games even. So the design tells you a lot about what you want, and that actually kind of feeds back into some of the other things I've been thinking about communities, which is that, first of all, you design for what you want people to do. So if you're Facebook, you want a lot of quick responses, you want it to be moving, you want it to be like a river, right? It's just going, it's going, it's going, keep it flowing no matter what. If you're a forum and you want a lot of thoughtful posts about artificial intelligence and metagaming and all sorts of stuff, then you use a stripped down forum like Spy Party has, and you're going to get a lot more of that. And I think what it is, and I've tried to boil down community management to like a sentence, and that's a ridiculous idea. But insofar as I can, I think it is that whatever a community is, it becomes more of. Whatever is there self reinforces. I don't know if you've ever heard of something called the broken window theory.
I've heard of it, but I don't actually know what it is. So if you want to
Yeah, the
explain to
basic
all of
idea.
us, please.
Well, yeah, I have to explain it anyway, don't I? If I'm going to mention it.
Yes,
So,
yes.
yeah, the broken window theory is that, well, I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. I liked putting things succinctly, but I don't know if that's going to work here. The succinct version of the broken window theory is that if you leave little things uncorrected, they happen more often. So it's called the broken window theory because if you go through a neighborhood and there are broken windows, you're going to see a lot more broken windows soon if they're not fixed. Because people who go by, who would think about breaking a window, are going to see that last broken window didn't get fixed. Nobody around here cares. Nobody gives a crap.
Okay, so
This
it
is a
becomes
place where
self-perpetuating.
it does. This is a place where I can chuck a rock and nobody's gonna give it crap. That's the nicest way you can put it, right? And so communities are the same way. If spam goes up and it stays up, then people know this place is not moderated. If there is hate speech and it's not removed, then people know this is the kind of place where I can say anything. So people who value being able to say anything are going to stick around. And people who dislike it when you can say anything without repercussions, they're not going to stay. And if you have stupid people, they're going to attract more stupid people. And if you have thoughtful people, then the next thoughtful person who comes by and reads something thoughtful is going to say, "Oh, how refreshing. Something thoughtful," and maybe they'll stick around. So your community is constantly becoming more of whatever it already is, which is both really encouraging and really terrifying. And it explains why Checker is so nervous about opening up the beta sometimes, because I gotta say, he is dead on with that, man.
Mm.
If there's an influx, it can kill this thing like that. And you can't hear it, but I'm snapping while I say that. Because it'll reinforce. It'll reinforce so fast. It'll snowball in no time at all.
Yeah, it is a fear, but I guess that's why it feels like the period we're in now, this what Chris had just posted there's 15,000 people who've registered now. It's like tiny. But this sort of period where we're establishing what the community is very important.
Yes, and actually that's another thing that is kind of ties in so well with community management in general is that when you start off, there really isn't anyone there but the owner and maybe a couple friends, and they have to set the tone, and they have to set the tone for a really long time. I was the top poster on my site for so long, for years and years and years. It took so long. I think it was literally just last year that someone finally passed me. And you have to get things going, and you have to show people what you want. You have to encourage it. And that is what Checker has done. He's made it clear this is what I want, this is what I don't want, this is what I will tolerate, this is what I won't. And I just want people to make sure they appreciate what he's doing there because it really is a constant job.
It is
He's not
huge the amount of work he's done to make the community what it is.
Yeah, I mean, everyone talks about how much work he's doing just to make the game, and that is absolutely considerable. But he's not just hanging around the forums just to hang around the forums. He kind of has to be there still at with a community this size, to direct it and nudge it here and there. And that actually has a really big effect too, because I've found over the years that being personally involved with the site, it kind of makes people want to follow the rules. For the same reason with the broken window theory. It's one thing to break a window in like an old abandoned garage when there's no one around and you don't think anyone's ever going to care. It's another thing to break a window and then have a little old lady come out and say, "I have to fix that. It's going to cost me money. What are you doing?" It's hard to feel like a cool rebel. When
Hmm.
you're just hurting some defenseless little person.
Well,
Like if you know the
yeah,
person,
or if it's a defenseless old person that you know that you've spoken to and have a relationship with.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's easy to hurt people we don't know. It really is, and it's very hard to hurt people we do, even if we don't like them that much. It just doesn't feel the same. There's just too much humanity in us. So if you know the person who runs the forum on a personal level, you don't want to start trouble. I've had so much success on my forum over the years, just by literally, if someone causes trouble, just sending them a message and saying, hey man, like this is making more work for me and my moderators. Not saying like, how dare you, I'm gonna ban you. You don't even have to go into threats right away or anything. You just say, look, we're just people. We're just people trying to keep this running smoothly. And when you do this, this happens, and we have to literally take time out of our day to fix it. And that helps a lot. And it might be fun to break stuffy rules enforced by some faceless admin, but it's really hard to pretend you're some lovable, chaotic, good rogue when there's a normal person sitting there explaining to you why breaking the rule is messing up their day.
Hmm.
And Checker is around all the time, and if you want to mess with the forum, you have to literally see this person and say, I want to make your life a little worse today. And as long as he's around, that's really hard to do.
Hmm. Well, and now I mean I um, like imagine also then you'd be getting on the bad side of many people in the forum as well who would also be complaining to you saying the way you're behaving is inappropriate.
Yeah, and that's the self-reinforcing part, is that
Hmm.
now it's not just him. Now there are, dozens of basically spokespeople for the game, people who have an emotional involvement in it, who feel a responsibility, feel an investment in it, and so that's a nice little margin. I mean, there are a lot of things that could make the community worse, and Checker is right to worry about them, but it couldn't just happen overnight, right away, because there would be a lot of pushback, because he's got all that goodwill, because he's built that up for so many years,
Hmm.
because he's understood the way communities self-reinforce, and so far they have self-reinforced. It's been a virtuous cycle so far, for several years now, and that's another reason why the long beta actually sort of a blessing in disguise, because that culture is really entrenched right now in a way it wouldn't be if this had only been going on for 12 months.
Yeah, slow burn development is it feels like kind of underappreciated in video game development that like communities are a thing that um, growing slowly over time is good. Like
Hmm.
that feels like an ideology that's undervalued.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't mean it's always good, but you're right. Undervalued, right? Speed is valued a little too much right now. And by the way, that dovetails perfectly with what we were just talking about. With the way forums are different from social media. They're not as transient. They're a little more permanent, a little more stable. His game development cycle is exactly the same. His game development cycle is the forum of video games compared to the social media of, well, frankly, social media games, the kind of games you play on Facebook and a lot of other ones, and even major titles that still come out in just a year or two, with
I
a lot
mean,
of
yeah,
scope. So,
I was gonna briefly point out there is one addendum we should point out, which is that this forum, unlike for um, for discussion of movies, you actually have to pay money to buy a game to join
Yes.
the forum. So that like is admittedly a large filter of if you were in the forum, it kind of means that you care enough about this game that you would spend money on it.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. But I think what that probably does is it just changes the problems he has to face. I don't know if it makes them better or worse. On one hand, obviously, you're not going to get people just kamikazing their way through the community, right? Signing
Mm.
up just to start trouble, just to mess with people. No one's going to spend $15 to do that. On the other hand, you know, people can get pretty angry. You know, if the game doesn't work, if it's not what they expected, if it's not what they hoped, they have a legitimate gripe. In some sense, if I want to be a little rough and tumble with someone on my site who's causing trouble, I usually won't, but I can be, and it's nice to be able to deal harshly with someone who's being very poorly behaved, right? He can't really do that. These are all customers. These are all
Yeah.
paying customers, and you see that in Checker's tone. He doesn't. He's not going to shout people down or be particularly harsh with them, even if maybe sometimes someone on the forums posts something a little rude here or there, or in the chat or anything like that. But he can't just go off on them. He can do it a lot more than someone who works at a AAA game studio because he's his own boss, and I'm sure that's lovely. But not as much as someone who says, you know what, you're not actually a paying customer, you're just one more user, and I don't have to be particularly nice to you. You're not a customer, I don't have to think you're always right,
Mm.
as the
No,
old saying goes.
yeah. No, I actually saw this and like hopefully it became like slightly wiser in this experience. Had this happen on Twitter where it's like after Chris was talking about something, someone was sort of lambasting him about the game not being done or whatever, saying, "Oh, yeah, it was something along the lines of you should be paying us money to join the beta because we're helping you instead of us paying you." And I was complaining to this person saying that's very unreasonable. He's worked very hard and the game is very very robust where it is. And he basically pointed out to me, look, like if this is the tone they're taking, it's just not worth your time to have this argument. And I was like,
Right.
well,
Yeah.
he's right. It's so I feel like he's had a lot of experience with this sort of engagement with people.
Yeah, I think he's got a thick skin about it. He's been in the industry for a while. There've been some mini controversies here and there. He probably knows how to deal with this. But even if he weren't as great dealing with it, he really wouldn't be able to lay into that guy. That wouldn't be good business. It wouldn't be worth it. The risk of there ending up being a really unflattering Kotaku article about it is way higher than the benefit he would get from telling off one guy and blowing off a little bit of steam. Because
Mm.
he is trying to sell the game, and that is a potential customer. Giving feedback, harsh as it might be. So, I don't know if he always has that option, but because he's built this community, you thought about maybe saying something to him, and a lot of people will say these things for him too. So I find that very interesting.
Yeah, so 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 now I'm like uncertain if like it is worthwhile to respond to people who are being like accusing or rude towards him because the impression I got was him saying you're not going to be able to change this person's opinion, especially on Twitter.
Right. Yeah. Well, then that ties into what we said earlier about the medium. Twitter is not the medium for changing minds. It's the medium for broadcasting, not receiving.
Mm.
That's just the way it works. And that's fine for what it needs to be, but it's just not good for sure. It's even worse for arguments than Facebook. And as someone who's tried to argue on Twitter a couple times, I can tell you, it's unpleasant in every sense of the word, logistically, emotionally, everything. It's just not good.
Yeah, I'd heard someone made in a different podcast this interesting suggestion for something like Twitter where you have uh, a series of representatives for a person who will like if that person is like known to be like attacked regularly, someone like I don't know Anita Sarkeesian, then she can like appoint people who will be able to filter through her Twitter feed and respond
Oh,
to
right.
or what's it called or block people. And I thought, oh, that sounds like a good suggestion. They're probably not going to do
Right.
that, but if Twitter did, that would be great.
Yeah, but that really proves that the medium is all wrong for it. If you have to basically form a council of guardians to help you trawl through your responses, then it's pretty clear that they're not expecting you to engage that way with people very often. You
Hmm.
know, so yeah. But I also think, by the way, that argument that this anonymous person made earlier about we're helping you develop the game. Oh my goodness, it reminds me of people who talk about torrenting movies and say we're giving the filmmaker exposure, that kind of thing.
I haven't heard that. Wait, people think that torrenting movies is good for exposure?
Yes, okay. As someone who likes movies and actually is like interested in argument as like an art form, sort of, I think like it's interesting the way arguments cohere, and I think it's interesting why bad arguments are bad. I think that's like an interesting thing to ask yourself.
That sounds like a
I
really good
I gotta
forum
say,
topic.
right? I have literally thought about starting a forum that's about nothing but arguing on
Yeah, pl
forums.
please post that. I think we'd all benefit immensely. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, but having said that, I can tell you with very little doubt that there is basically no topic more rife with horribly thought out, flimsy arguments than movie downloading, than torrenting films. It's the bad arguments marshaled in defense of this, whether you think it's okay or not, or whether you think it's terrible, or whether or not you're like me, where you think yes, it's unethical, but it's not the end of the world, kind of thing. Yes, it's technically wrong. Wherever you come down, the arguments marshaled in its defense are horrendous, and yes, that is one of them that I have heard literally dozens of people say.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really bad. And as someone who is not whose forum users are not customers, I can say this to them, and it is very gratifying.
But then you have to wallow in that argument when you do say that.
Well, the nice thing about being in the admin is you can just ban people indiscriminately. I never would, of course, and I never ever 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 have. But you
No,
but you
you ban
can
discriminately, not indiscriminately.
discriminately. That's right, discriminately. When you make that terrible argument, then you get banned. Yeah.
Yeah, you're
But
justified.
but like But the nice thing is, like, he does have there's sort of an in between thing with the community right now where he has flexibility, right? He can, like I said before, he can't just tell people off, right? That's just not good business. But he, like I also mentioned, he doesn't have a corporate boss. He's not part of some $100 million marketing budget machine. So he doesn't have to take a lot of crap from people. And it actually reminds me that like that's sort of I think about this a lot. That's one of the advantages that both the Spy Party community and the game in particular have on the big guys. There are things that indie games can't do. They can't get Eminem to write a song for their marketing campaign. They can't invest, $20 million in a physics engine. They can't crank one of these things out every 2 years, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there are also a lot of things that AAA studios can't do themselves. They're slower. There's a book. It's about business actually, and it's called "It's not the big that eat the small. It's the fast that eat the slow." It's supposed to be about business in the modern world, right? It's not that big companies crush small ones anymore. It's that adaptable, agile companies, fast companies, crush the slow, stodgy ones that are
Well,
slow to
yeah,
change.
I mean, although having said that, I don't know if Definition 6 is a fast-moving company.
Just fast moving. You're absolutely right. I should clarify what I'm saying a little bit. Fast, agile more than fast. Let's put it that way.
Hmm.
Not in terms of raw speed, but adaptable, right? Like I mean, the smaller your ship is, the faster it can turn around. If you try to turn around, as the story of the Titanic shows us, you can see that iceberg coming a mile away. But if your ship's too big, you're not turning in time, right? But if you're in a little dinghy, and I'm not saying Spy Party's a dinghy, it's just an example. You can turn around a lot quicker.
No,
So there are things that he
I
can
like
do.
that because you could then use that analogy to describe companies like the unsinkable Activision.
The unsinkable Activision. And by the way, Spy Party's always being compared to the ship, so I'm hardly the first one to
Ah,
compare it to a ship. Um, yeah, there are things that AAA studios can't do. One of my favorite moments being in the Spy Party beta was that there was a discussion about Veranda going on, and people were talking about how the statue visits. I'm not sure how long you've been in the community, but early on, the Veranda statue locations, there was one statue at each.
yeah, it changed
Um,
around a few times. It was like that, then it was like I think there were sets of three.
I don't remember. I think it might have been considered, but anyway, we were like literally talking about it, and I said, just double them up, just do two, And if I hadn't said it, somebody else would have. I'm not saying this is like a revolutionary idea,
Hmm.
but he was close to a build, anyway, and so he threw that in, and like 2 weeks later, I'm playing the thing I said, and I thought, wow, this would never happen. If this weren't a close knit indie community, if
Hmm.
this weren't both an indie game and the kind of community where Checker had decided that he needed to be really involved day to day. Both of those things came together, and I'll never forget that. That moment made me a fan for life.
Wow, awesome.
Because to see that engagement, to see that this person is listening, and to think to myself that just couldn't happen if this were even a 10-person team. Um, so, maybe not, maybe fast isn't the right word, but adaptable, open,
Mm.
flexible, agile, absolutely. And that's true, and that really ties in very close to the community thing because there's nothing to be agile about if he's not taking feedback. He can't be quick and respond to user feedback if there's no user feedback. So, is actually a huge part. A huge part of this is that, um, how do I put this? I'm trying to think of a good way to say it, but we're talking about the game, we're talking about the community like they're two different things, but they're not. Not in
No,
this case.
not at all.
So much of what he's implemented in this game has come from the community. So many of the ideas have come from that. And they've come, I'm not saying he takes them, but he solicits them, he asks, he
Well,
throws
yeah.
ideas out and sees what people add to them. In this case, I feel like as an indie developer, you sort of need a forum like this. You need to think about community in a way you don't because that's where these ideas are going to come from.
Mm.
Crowdsourcing.
I mean, case in point, Virofo, one of the very experienced behavioral players, basically came up with two of the missions that are in the game.
Yeah, Fingerprint most recently, and what was the other one?
Purloin. I'm not. Wait, did he
Purloin.
come up with Purloin, or was that someone else? I
I
think it was
don't
him.
know.
I think.
Yeah,
I'm
I,
gonna
I
say
gotta say,
yes.
I gotta say, I think it's very shrewd of Viri that the behavioralist who doesn't particularly like watching hardtails convinced the developer to put in another one of the types of missions that he likes to watch. I think that's very shrewd
It added
indeed.
behavior to drinking. That's behaviorism.
It did. And drinking modifies behavior, in my
Hmm.
experience as well. Yeah, I think,
Good rule for life. Drinking
yeah,
modifies
good.
behavior.
Drinking modifies behavior. If you had to sum up life, yeah, yeah, exactly. And those have had huge ripple effects on the game. And there's so many things here about this game that Checker has said he had to sort of discover. He had his preconceptions about how certain things would work, and I think a lot of his vision ended up being right on. Even years later. But there've been a lot of major diversions from what he was originally thinking about doing, and they happened because he had that community, because he fostered a community, and he showed people that their ideas would be listened to. Obviously, the overwhelming majority of ideas don't make it into the game,
Hmm.
and a good chunk of them don't even necessarily get a lot of feedback. That's just too many flying around. But I said earlier that he made a fan for life when he made that change, like 2 weeks after I mentioned it. But there's more than that too. That means that if I have something that I think might help the game, I'm absolutely going to say it because I know someone's listening and maybe it'll get in there if it's a good enough idea.
Hmm.
And I wouldn't bother to do that. If I had a great idea tomorrow for Advanced Warfare 2, I'm not going to go on their forum and tell them nobody's listening. It could be the best idea in the world. It's never happening. Not only is it not happening, no one's going to read it. I might get a few other users just going, "Yeah, wouldn't that be cool?" And that's it. It's over. But if I have even a moderately good idea for Spy Party, even just a "Hey, wouldn't this be interesting? Maybe this will lead to something" kind of idea, I'm posting it immediately.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I still don't know exactly what's happening, but I remember starting that discussion about whether religious diversity should be a part of Spy Party, and that's actually
Yes.
potentially going to be an inclusion.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's the kind of thing that, having a smart, thoughtful, diverse community is going to help you with. If you're again, if you're Activision or something, you know what you do there. Well, for one thing, at best, you're running it by a bunch of lawyers and a bunch of
Yeah,
random
seeing
people and a bunch of
who
focus
will
groups.
sue us.
Yes, that's the best case scenario, by the way. The worst case scenario is that you say, we are not going within a million miles of these topics, not worth the risk. And I don't blame them. I'm not trying to make fun of these larger companies. They have money to make and they're putting a lot of money into it. And it does not make sense for them to take that risk. But
Hmm.
this is something that, whether it happens in the game or not, it can be talked about. You bring it up and then we talk about it and we go through the motions. And some people say, well, maybe it could work, and others say, well, it's risky. I don't know. And it may or may not happen, but the fact that it could says a lot because he has a very dedicated focus group here with, by the way, a surprising amount of religious diversity from what I've seen too.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
that
I
was
wouldn't have
what
guessed
really
that, by
impressed
the
me
way.
was that there was both a diverse group of people, but also that everyone was so what's the right word? So understanding in discussion. No one was being judgmental of others, which was crazy.
Yeah,
When talking about
yeah,
religion, like that's
on the internet.
on the yes on the internet. That's like not supposed
The
to be a
two
thing.
things, the topic most conducive to argument in the human history, on the medium most conducive to argument in human
With argument,
history,
yes,
and and there were no arguments. So
it was
yeah, pretty
insane.
cool. Yeah, it was insane. It was insane. So, um, Yeah, and again, these are just things that are just they feed into the development cycle, and they are just totally impossible if he hasn't built that community. If you haven't built a community, I mean, the power of the internet when you build this is huge. People talk about crowdsourcing a lot, and I feel like early on it was just this idea that oh, you just throw things out there, and just all this stuff comes back, and it's great, and it's just great. And no, it wasn't great. It was messy. It was like those Twitter feeds you mentioned where there's just a ton of stuff and you can't separate the wheat from the chaff. So that's kind of what, I think you've helped me understand communities a little better just by kind of talking about this because maybe that's kind of what running a good community is you have to create a culture that's going to separate that wheat from the chaff automatically. That's going to encourage those things so that more and more the things they post on their own are self-censoring, self-excluding. I mean censoring in a good way. I mean censoring
Mm.
the worst thoughts we have, the unproductive things we think and then think about saying. I think a big part of running community is getting to the point where it's just a well-oiled machine that churns out interesting, thoughtful things. And that just takes so much work. It's like raising a child,
Yeah, well,
Hopefully at the
but
end of
yeah,
18 years you've got a thoughtful human being.
I mean, I, I'd say that that's not a perfect analogy because it's not a machine. It's a very human thing. It's a community. It's
Right. Yeah.
um, but it's still hopefully if it's being run well is a healthy community where people are supporting each other. And I think that's something that's sort of important from like what I've seen in Spy Party and what I've read about various communities um, online in this past year is that censorship and well, like self-censoring and caring about the values of of a community is very important, and more forums should be taking it seriously. Because
Hmm.
it
Yeah.
seems like there's a lot of online communities where that doesn't happen, and these very negative communities are born out of it, and the administrators have this sort of laissez-faire approach where they're like, well, we shouldn't be censoring anybody, that would be wrong, and so but then that like perpetuates
Yes.
more marginalization, which is worse. So
Yeah.
yeah. So it's
I,
important to do this, and I would hope to God that more communities would um, take seriously filtering their communities.
that's something that comes up on my forum all the time is new users will come in and they just assume because it's on the internet that they can say whatever they want, and I don't even blame them. I actually give a lot of leeway to new users for that reason. If they come in and just say something just totally off the wall, totally against the rules, I almost never ban them right away. I almost always just get rid of it and I send them a message and say, look, I know the internet is a place where you can almost always say anything you want, but this isn't like that. It's a little different here. Give them a chance to say, "Oh, okay, sorry, I didn't realize." Let them know. And actually, that's kind of what I mean by machine. You're right; it's not a good analogy at all. The thing I should probably say is automatic. The
Yeah,
point
yeah.
where he can take his hand off the bicycle, and we're going to keep going and be thoughtful and honor his intentions even when he's not there every day. Try to get it to that point. That's what you're trying to build. You're trying to build again, not yeah, you're right, not a machine, but just a sort of an automatic culture that has reinforced itself to the point where it can also protect itself and regulate itself. And and that's the thing you say about censorship is a really big deal. A lot of people what they love about the internet is that you don't have to be censored. And that can be a beautiful thing. But I tend to think of it more like an option, a last resort. It's not the fact that you can say anything, the fact that you have free speech in real life doesn't mean you go around yelling everything that pops into your head.
Mm,
And I think creating a forum culture is really about kind of just showing people what you're trying to create, what you want to come out of it, um, using that to self-exclude so that people who don't want that don't have to be a part of it, and people who do can stay and can help you get that by just attracting the kind of people who also want to say the same kind of things and read the same kind of things, and will help you get there.
mm. Awesome. All right. Well, that felt like a very good discussion about online community. So thank you very much, Warningtrack, for taking part in this.
Thank you for having me. I hope it's interesting to some people, and I hope anyone who's been thinking about this will think about starting a forum because it is
Yeah.
I don't want to say a dying medium. There aren't as many of them as there used to be, but there's still a lot of really diehard communities, and we can use more of them. We could use more good community managers because it leads to much more thoughtful discussion.
Mm. It's like taking up calligraphy.
Yes, yeah. Stop and smell the roses, kind of thing. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Warning Track, and we'll see everybody next week.